What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Today, we are going over some risky mid-round running backs. We'll go over a handful of them, letting you know if we think you should draft them at their current ADP or not. If you want breakdowns on all draftable players, consider signing up for our draft package available at thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Any all-in access member is eligible for all giveaways this offseason, courtesy of our friends at Pristine Auction. Consider signing up with them using code FFA at sign up, and you will get a free $5 credit added to your account. What better Father's Day gift than some signed memorabilia? And even if you're not in the market to buy one right now, you may as well just sign up for an account and nab that credit while the offer still lasts, because who's to say how long the promotion will continue? And if you think about it, it's free money. But before we do get into the video though, stat of the day. Yesterday's stat of the day was which wide receiver with at least 80 targets had the highest average depth of target. The correct answer, Mike Williams. His average depth of target was a whopping 18.1 yards. Congratulations, Pearson Hurst, you got this one right. Let's see who can get today's question right. Today's stat of the day, which running back led the league in evaded tackles? Leave your answer in the comment section down below. We'll be happy to let you know who wins in tomorrow's video. Without further ado though, let's hop right into the video. The first risky mid-round running back is going to be Raheem Mostert of the San Francisco 49ers. Currently, he's coming off the board at the back of the 5th round. Right around running back 26, so a high-end RB3. If you draft him, you're likely going to be starting him, and it would be a steal if we could guarantee the production that he received towards the end of last season and into the playoffs. But there still are some risk factors that we do have to be aware of before locking him in and considering him of value. The first of which, he may be a new name to fantasy football when it comes to relevancy, but he's been in the league for a very long time. He's 28 years old. Typically, running backs at 28 are heading towards the tail end of their careers, but Raheem Mostert, he just had his first breakout season. He is on an offense very conducive for positive fantasy football production, but there is still some competition for touches and targets behind him. Remember, they have Tevin Coleman as well as Jerick McKinnon on the roster. While we haven't seen Jerick McKinnon healthy and we're not really banking on him to reemerge as anything substantial, these are still two players that are very capable of getting the job done if the ball's given to them. Both Coleman and McKinnon have proven to be superior pass catchers throughout their careers, and that's an area where Raheem Mostert's production was virtually non-existent in 2019. Jumping back to his age though, he's 28, he's bounced around between 5 different NFL teams, and prior to the 2019 season, his career high in touches for a single season was 40 touches. That was with San Francisco in 2018, but he's a very unproven commodity, both from his ability to handle a heightened workload over an extended period of time, as well as the potential of him being able to maintain this level of high production. That's not to say overall that drafting him is a terrible pick. There is a team where Raheem Mostert could fit on a roster. However, to dilute some of that risk you're taking when drafting him, we would prefer to have him as an RB4. And right now, since he's going as a high-end RB3, it's just not realistic to expect that. So what we're trying to say is definitely don't reach on him, let him fall to you. This is a player who could potentially fall in drafts, so he does have that in his favor. And it wouldn't surprise any of us if he does lead this backfield in fantasy points by the end of the season. Up next, we have Kerryon Johnson of the Detroit Lions. Right now, he can be drafted in and around the 8th, 9th round, which may have the illusion of a value because he is likely to see some level of volume early on in the season. They did draft DeAndre Swift early in the 2019 NFL draft, so they will be competing for touches and targets. DeAndre Swift, also a capable pass catcher between the 20s. It should be fair game for Kerryon Johnson and DeAndre Swift to compete for touches. However, we are expecting, as the season progresses, for that workload to move more and more in favor of DeAndre Swift, so long as he doesn't botch his opportunity. So clearly, we're not expecting Kerryon Johnson to improve from his numbers or involvement from seasons ago. Year 1 in Detroit, he was competing for touches with LeGarrette Blount. Fast forward to year 2, he did see an opportunity to get a more featured role, but didn't make the most of it before going down with a knee injury. So there were always concerns that we had with Kerryon Johnson with his ability to maintain a high target and touch total. In comes DeAndre Swift to lighten the load for him, and while that may help him from his ability to stay on the field and remain healthy, that's just not going to help him produce for your fantasy team. The question will always remain, is there going to be enough volume for you to trust him in your lineup consistently week over week? We don't think so. So essentially, in order for him to pay off at this price point and for him to be an every week starter, it would have to come on the back of an injury to DeAndre Swift. And if we're relying on an injury for his fantasy value to skyrocket, that makes him essentially a handcuff, yet he's being drafted several rounds higher than other handcuffs. And if that scenario really does happen and he is the lead back in this backfield, he still has not proven that he has the durability to handle a full workload, which is exactly why they brought in DeAndre Swift to lighten the load. Why else would they bring in a running back that has a similar pass catching skill set as opposed to an early down bruiser? Clearly, it's to lighten the load for Kerryon Johnson to have him available throughout the entire season. So while his fantasy points per game will likely increase dramatically if there were an injury to DeAndre Swift, it's not a guarantee that Kerryon Johnson will finish out the season without coming down with an injury himself. Either that, or they'll bring in another player, thus minimizing the upside you were expecting with an injury to Swift. So overall, we do see him as more of a handcuff style of player, one with durability concerns, whose ceiling and upside is quite limited compared to other players in their range if there were an injury to the running back ahead of him. So for us, if we were interested in taking Kerryon Johnson, it would definitely be several rounds later. So until that's reflected in his ADP, we're definitely avoiding him at that price point. The next risky mid-round running back we have is Mark Ingram of the Baltimore Ravens. You can currently nab him in around the 5th round, coming off the board as the RB23, and I know this selection of including him on a risky running back list isn't going to sit well with a lot of people, because I have heard plenty of people throughout this offseason consider Mark Ingram one of the safest players in that range. We would definitely disagree with that, and we'll explain exactly why. So J.K. Dobbins, he is undeniably the future. You'll be hard-pressed to find anybody really arguing with that fact. That's why he's such a high value and high round draft pick when it comes to dynasty startup leagues, but understandably that may not be detrimental to his fantasy value for this upcoming season. However, the Baltimore Ravens are going to need to see what they can get from J.K. Dobbins before feeling comfortable of letting go of Mark Ingram. Mark Ingram next season can be cut, traded, or released for a very minimal cap hit, but there's no way the Baltimore Ravens can feel comfortable doing that without giving J.K. Dobbins somewhat of a substantial workload for this upcoming season. Mark Ingram himself already wasn't a high volume player. He ranked 20th when it comes to rush attempts and 46th when it comes to targets out of the backfield. So if he had such low volume totals, how was it that he was so relevant for fantasy? Well, a lot of it came down to touchdowns. He ranked 7th in rushing touchdowns, as well as 2nd when it comes to scoring on receptions. These are two figures that are likely going to decrease. We know as it stands, touchdowns are already fluky, and while Baltimore should remain one of the better offenses in the league, it is just impossible to expect for them to maintain that level of elite production. Prior to this season, they didn't have a rusher on the backfield that they had a vested interest in giving a substantial amount of volume. They did pay for Mark Ingram. Well, now J.K. Dobbins is going to get the opportunity to prove himself, and that's going to come at the expense of touches to Mark Ingram. Touches that were already very low, like I said, ranking 20th in rushes and 46th in targets. So if those numbers go down, he is almost required to maintain that insane touchdown rate, which just isn't a realistic expectation. We're not saying he's doomed by any means, and we don't think he's going to take a massive dip when it comes to his efficiency numbers from last season. That's not why we don't feel comfortable taking him where he's currently being drafted. But for a player who is already ranking towards the bottom of the league when it comes to volume for fantasy running back starters, that's definitely going to inflate the level of risk that you're going to be assuming when drafting him. Also consider there are going to be a lot of people in your league that will be targeting Mark Ingram because he did help people win their leagues last season. So if it were up to us, we're going to let those people pay for last year's hyper efficiency when it's almost a guarantee his volume is going to decrease. The next player we have on the risky mid-round running backs list is Devin Singletary of the Buffalo Bills, and I know that may come as a surprise to some people. I know he's on a lot of lists as a safe running back to take in this range, but for us, we don't really see it that way. First, you have to understand Zach Moss is always going to be a factor in year one. They brought him in presumably to not only compete for touches between the 20s, but to play a sizable role in the red zone. We know Devin Singletary last season was far from featured in this area. The only competition ahead of him in the 2019 season for red zone production was Frank Gore, and even with Frank Gore inching closer and closer to the age of 40, Singletary was used on just 26.5% of carries inside the 20, under 10% of carries inside the 10, and just 2 total carries inside the 5-yard line. That's a pretty shocking stat, especially when you consider Frank Gore wasn't even all that good in that area. Frank Gore in 2019 ranked 12th in rushes inside the 5, yet ranked outside the top 36 in rushing touchdowns inside the 5-yard line, and that's with being on an offense with Josh Allen, who is always a threat to score the ball in the red zone with his legs, which does mean the teams can't hyper focus stacking the box on the running back because the defense always has to be aware of what Josh Allen can do with his legs and potentially score touchdowns, as he is proven to do in his first 2 seasons, scoring 8 rushing touchdowns in 2018, following that up with 9 in 2019. In comes Zach Moss, who does have the prototypical build for a rusher to be used inside the red zone. He stands at 5'9", 223 pounds, so we have a low center of gravity, 93rd percentile BMI, who's also a player who scored double-digit touchdowns on the ground in each of the past 3 seasons in college. Devin Singletary himself, yes, he was very efficient on his touches. He averaged over 5 yards per carry, but that number could be a bit deceiving. We did a stat of the day earlier on in the offseason on which running back faced the least amount of stacked boxes in the league. That player was Devin Singletary. He only received a stacked box on 5.3% of his total carries. And while I'm not using that as a way to take anything away from him and saying he's not a talented player, we're just saying that his efficiency can definitely take a dip, especially if we're expecting him to see an increased role on the ground. Zach Moss himself, also a capable pass catcher, so there's no guarantee Moss won't eat into his production and volume when it comes to his touches in between the 20s. And right now, Devin Singletary is coming in as a back-end RB2. In order to land him on your team, you're going to invest a high 5th round pick. And for us, if you can't guarantee the red zone volume, his efficiency does have a chance to take a dip as well. And Zach Moss is much more of a threat to take away some of the valuable touches between the 20s, much more so than he had for competition in 2019 with Frank Gore. But guys, that's going to do it for this video. We really hoped you enjoyed. How about letting us know in the comments section which mid-round risky running backs you're targeting or avoiding? And while you're there, how about hitting that like button? If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. We thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.